Today, we're digging into something pretty heavy. This question of Adam's sin, eating the forbidden fruit, and why it's often framed as deserving eternal punishment. It feels like a huge leap, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I think for most people, the initial reaction is, wait, hold on, a piece of fruit leading to eternal consequences. It's the kind of thing that really makes you stop and think.
Exactly. And that's pretty much the starting block for our source today, which is Nick Bible's article, Did Adam's Sin Deserve an Eternal Punishment? So our mission really is to try and understand the line of reasoning presented there, why this seemingly small act might warrant such a, infinite penalty within that theological framework.
Yeah, and what's interesting, right off the bat, is how the article shifts the focus.
Yeah.
It argues it's less about the specific, the eating, and much more about who was disobeyed.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. The source uses an analogy that I found quite helpful. It compares stealing from, say, a beggar versus stealing from someone with immense authority like the President of the United States.
Exactly. The action, theft, might be similar on the surface, but the gravity, the consequences, they're worlds apart because of the office, the authority of the person who's been wronged. And the article suggests we should view sin through that kind of lens. The higher the authority you offend,
the more serious the offense becomes. And this is where, naturally, the concept of God's authority is central. The source presents God as the absolute ultimate authority. The creator of everything, the lawgiver, an eternal being outside of time itself.
That's the core premise. So if you start from there, sinning against that God isn't just like breaking some minor household rule. The article frames it as a direct assault on that ultimate authority. It's seen as profound disrespect, and even according to the source, like siding with God's rival, with Satan.
So it really elevates the act beyond just disobedience about a piece of fruit. It's about rejecting the commander. Now, the source also brings in another really key concept, God's holiness.
Yes, absolutely crucial.
It quotes scripture, calling God holy, 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 really driving home this idea of God's perfect, infinite purity.
And this connects directly to the punishment aspect in the article's argument. If God is infinitely holy, eternally holy, then any sin against him, any impurity directed towards him, takes on an infinite and eternal weight. Like the source says, if God was eternally holy, then the punishment would be eternal, as God is called holy, holy, holy. He is the eternally holy God.
So eternal God, eternal holiness, therefore eternal consequences for sin against him. That's the logic.
That's the logic presented in the source, yeah.
The article also points to Samuel 2.25. What's the relevance there?
Well, that verse suggests something interesting. It implies that, look, if people have disputes, maybe God or a judge can mediate. But if someone sins directly against the Lord, who can possibly intercede, it kind of underscores this idea of the unique severity when the offense is directly against God himself.
It certainly paints a picture of absolute authority and holiness. But you can see how this might lead some people to ask about, mercy or alternative interpretations, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's a very valid point. This is definitely one specific theological perspective we're exploring today based on this source. It really leans heavily on this particular understanding of God's nature, his authority and holiness, to build its case for why the punishment is seen as eternal.
Okay. So just to kind of wrap up the argument presented by Nick Bible here, the idea is that the seemingly massive consequence for Adam's sin isn't really about the fruit itself. It flows from the understanding of God as this eternal, infinitely holy, ultimate authority. So any act against him is incredibly serious, carrying that eternal weight.
That's it. It boils down to the infinite value and authority of the one who was offended, rather than just the mechanics of the offense itself.
Right. Well, this deep dive certainly gives us a framework to consider based on the source, and it leaves you, the listener, with something to think about. If we accept these arguments about God's nature and authority as presented here, how does that shape our view of divine justice? And maybe what other parts of that Genesis story could influence how we understand sin and consequences?